I am joined today by none other than a gentleman who goes by the name of Grummz on the internet, aka Mark Kern, aka the team lead of World of Warcraft, which I sunk a ridiculous amount of time into during the first original Warcraft release. Nice job on that, by the way. He also worked on Diablo 2 and StarCraft. He basically, like my top game shelf of my top 10 games, he worked like 3 or 4 of them, which is pretty incredible. Nice job on that. But why we're talking to Grummz here today is because he spends a great deal of his time pointing out the craziness of wokeness and DEI-ness and all of the insanity in the video game industry. A lot of the stuff I do in the open source world, Grummz is over there doing and fighting the good fight in the video game world. And people have been screaming at me for a long time now for the two of us to actually talk to each other. So we are finally doing it, and I am joined by what is absolutely exactly what Grummz looks like. Say hello to the world, my friend.
Hey, thanks a lot, Brian. Yeah, so I've been following you for the past year or so,
Stop.
and noticing a lot of things that I noticed way back when. So like 10 years ago, I guess I got into this uh, because I noticed that there was something happening in the gaming world called Gamergate.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
Yeah,
All right. All right. Give
and
us, yeah, give me the rundown on where you were at with Gamergate.
well, I was pretty shocked because I was pretty naive back there, and I had a lot of relationship with game journalists. Uh, we worked with them extensively at Blizzard and at my other companies, and I thought, and we had a unified front against Jack Thompson, who was trying to cancel all video games at the time.
Yeah. Good
And
times.
back when we were working on Diablo 2, we had to change the cover after the Columbine incident and the Jack Thompson stuff. We had to like cover up the hole in the skull because we thought that we would be roasted for that. But I never had a problem with the press before then, and they were always gamers, right?
Yeah.
Especially back then, they were geeks just like us and gamers. But I realized that slowly changed, and we started getting people in with you know they were game they were game players, but maybe a little more casual, and they didn't quite have the same sort of passion. And it turns out that they had specific agendas that I wasn't aware of at the time. So, when Gamergate 1 happened, it was about ethics in game journalism. And this is proven now because we actually have recent news that just came out last week that US aid was pumping money into media organizations, including Politico, which incessantly attacked Gamergate and smeared it as a harassment campaign by the far right against women and minorities, which it was so not.
And to
Um,
be clear, I want to reiterate that you guys at home hear what Gross just pointed out. U.S. taxpayer dollars directly
oh
went
yeah,
to funding the news outlets that were attacking video game players, gamers.
yeah. You
It's
you can
crazy.
go to Politico and just I didn't believe it at first. I was like, that can't be true.
It's
It's like
nuts.
and then it's everything that we thought was happening. It slowly dawned on us because we didn't understand the machine at the time, but it was slowly dawning upon everybody in Gamergate that something was happening. And Gamergate was a movement of all gamers who were upset about sexual favors being traded for indie game reviews,
Yeah.
and it kind of snowballed from there. And then we were very upset because the media started to smear us and gamers immediately, with the infamous Gamers Are Dead article by Alexander Lay. And they had this, and we discovered that they had a unified mailing list where they were coordinating these news articles together at the time. And they had a back channel, and then we would see that 300 articles would launch in a week with the exact same content, smearing gamers when and completely ignoring our points. And it got so bad that I was actually attending Gamergate events, and then I would see a report on it the next day that was just completely wrong. I mean, it was, if you could see what was happening with your own eyes, and then see that the news reports something completely different, including a bomb threat. By the way, a Gamergate venue had a bomb threat phoned in, and the press either didn't cover it or covered it very, very oddly, like
It was
as if we
weird.
were making it up, even though we had police reports. And then the other side would say, well, we're getting them too. And we're like, where are your police reports? And they have none. So
It
it's like,
was,
here's ours. Why don't you publish that? No, 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 no. We're not going to publish that. It
and
never happened.
Gamergate was a wild thing because I remember, I was working entirely on the open source side thing when Gamergate was happening, so I didn't have much chance to cover it. But I remember I was writing for Network World and Computer World at the time, and one of the writers there was trying to cover it, and he got a hold of me because he's like, "What the hell is going on?" And he's like, "I just read like 80 articles on Gamergate, and none of it makes any sense. There was so much noise being pumped out by Politico and all these different like game journalists and whatnot just were pumping out so much noise about it that it made it hard for people to even understand what the heck was happening."
We took everyone by surprise. We took all the big social media companies by surprise. This was really the genesis of an alarming trend for them, which was this. And for those in power, the government at the time, which is confirmed now, we talked about that confirmation. What was happening was we were red pilling normies, right?
Yeah.
So, that's the slang we use. Normies are the people who don't really follow up on this stuff. They're not constantly plugged into social media. They just want to live their lives and get along. But they were starting to notice that something was wrong and that the media in games was, not exactly being very unbiased or even truthful. And we had a wide segment of political spectrum, everything from the left to the right. We were all unified, right? And it's not the right wing thing that it was eventually edited to be later on by
No.
the smear campaign. And so that was very interesting. And what happened was this is when shadow banning was invented. So we noticed this because we had a lot of autists in the group, right? From 4chan
Oh yeah.
and everywhere
Lots
else.
of
And
weaponized autism. It's
yo,
beautiful.
lots,
Yeah.
and a lot of software engineers, and we noticed a couple things. We said, "Hey, I used to get stuff trending anytime I wanted to, right? Like the stuff was so explosive. Like if I talked about it, it would be on the trending list of Twitter within hours. And we did it for GDC at the talks that were happening there, the woke talks that were happening there, a couple other things, and suddenly that didn't happen anymore. And we noticed that the trend lists were being manipulated. And when we posted about this, we got so much pushback saying, no, it's completely, just driven by, you're just not popular. What you're saying isn't resonating with people. We now know that trend lists, and it's not controversial, trend lists are hand curated,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
they are hand monitored. And that was invented to stop Gamergate from trending because we were trending almost every day. And shadow banning
Those were
also
fun
invented.
times.
So around the time of Gamergate, leading up to the 2016 Trump administration, because what was happening was because we had red pilled people to the media, and large agencies like Breitbart was picking up on the movement. The fake news thing was starting to come out, and they couldn't have that. They didn't want news being accused of being fake, and so there was enormous amount of concern by these social media companies that we had too much influence, and so you had shadow banning and suppression. So we were getting deboosted. Again, people and shadow banned, and people said that doesn't happen, it doesn't exist, and oh my gosh,
Don't believe your lying eyes, man.
and we now have the Twitter files, and we know it's absolutely true. All that was invented because of Gamergate. So
How
that has
ridiculous is that? I mean,
I
how
know.
ridiculous is it that all is reality? That's actual history. That's
Yeah.
insane.
And then they refined the tools after that to what we have today, which is finally being pulled back, thanks to X and
Yeah.
thanks to the new administration and Facebook wanting to play ball now. Everybody wants to be on the good side, right? So they're all starting to pull this stuff back. And it also turns out that truth is profitable. X is doing very well financially, And despite what everyone was trying to say, they're actually I think they're
They're
running
doing pretty
twice
good.
the
Yeah.
profit now,
Yeah.
and they're doing very well. And so people want, that's a product people want to pay for. That's what they'll sub for. That's what they'll be on and talk about, is a site that promotes the truth. So all this stuff's slowly being pulled back, but that's what basically radicalized me, as you were referring to earlier.
Yeah.
When I realized that the media, who I had always had a good relationship with, so it was suddenly blacklisting me, was suddenly writing hit pieces on me, wasn't giving me a chance to talk to the guys that I know and write a response piece or anything else. It was completely unilaterally one-sided, and they were lying through their teeth. All right. And that finally pissed me off. And I was like, that is wrong. And so I've been fighting against the woke mind virus ever since then. But there was a time where I went dormant. Like, I was very active for several years, 10 years ago. And then I went dormant because I knew I was going to be banned from Twitter. It's like, if I keep going, I'm not. And by the way, my
Yeah.
follows went absolutely flat after those tools went in place. We're talking no growth whatsoever. I would get +5 one day. The next day, they would -5 it. It was like tit for tat. And the only time I ever broke out and got growth is if I got growth outside of Twitter that drove people in, and then it
Yeah.
was too big to hide. Then it was too big to hide and drain my followers over time. So that was absolutely, yeah. The graph is hilarious because as soon as X took over, boom, I started growing again like crazy. So, so it's like the graph looks like growth, 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 flatline for years, and then suddenly, boom, growth again. So when Gamergate 2 happened in March, that's when I got involved again. I said, we can't be having Kotaku lie about gamers like Kabrutus again and his DEI detective list.
Jeez.
So that's what happened to me. But along the way, and this ties into why I follow you now, is like, I noticed about that time, about 10 years ago, what was happening in open source. There were these huge witch hunts going on,
Huge.
and I noticed that a lot of it was from that it was very, especially one of these anti-gamergaters. Her name was Randy something, I can't remember, but she was big in open source as a contributor. But if you
Uh-huh.
look at her, and if you look at the commits of the people who are the radicalists back then, they were mostly on things like code of conduct. They were
Yeah.
mostly on non-code things or comments, you know?
Yes.
Not
Yes.
actual code. And what they were pushing for was a code of conduct that was so vague, in order to not promote hate, et cetera, et cetera. But they were then turned around and used as tools to radically change the power structure of these organizations and to push out developers over the most trivial things. It's like, well, this person used the term master and slave in their code, and we can't have that. And I noticed that. Oh, Randy Harper, that was her name.
Randy
That
Harper. That's a name I haven't heard in a while.
Yeah. And they were all up in open source. And I was like, what's going on here? And it was a power structure that was being put in place across
Yeah.
everything. And I noticed it back then, and I talked about it back then, but then I kind of forgot about it. And then I started following you, and I'm like, holy smokes, it's still going on.
Yeah, it got crazy. Speaking of the master slave thing, like they're still trying to push that. Like, I would have thought that the whole let's fight against master slave branches in source control, that would have died out because it was such a stupid argument. I would have thought it would have died out. But people just as recently as a few months ago were trying to attack the guy that created the Ladybird web browser, and they literally were accusing him of supporting human slavery because he wouldn't change his source control system to not include the master slave words. And they were like, we can't let him speak. He supports human slavery. It's the most insane thing ever that they really try to push that. It's crazy.
Yeah, and they were going through people's comments in source code, and if you said something that was a joke or mildly provocative or able to be misinterpreted in the worst light, that's
Yes.
what they love to do. They like to take something that's on its face neutral, and they like to interpret it in the most toxic way possible in order to paint the person and to remove them from power. And this was happening in game dev too. especially during the Me Too movement, that was weaponized internally inside studios to take out leads, to take out people so that people could take their jobs and get promoted into them. It was awful. But one funny thing is, do you remember? I think it's called C plus equal. It was the feminist safe programming language.
Fuck, I forgot that existed.
It was hilarious. I think that came out around that time too, and I was
Yeah,
dying. It
that was
was so funny.
ridiculous. That one went nowhere, but that one was ridiculous. There were so many ridiculous things like that. Like
Well, it was a parody. No, it was a brilliant parody, I
well,
think.
that one was a parody, but like there were people really doing that stuff. Like the GIMP image editor. Like someone forked GIMP because GIMP is, derogatory, is a derogatory word, and they renamed GIMP, and so they created essentially what was a woke fork, and apparently I killed it by calling it a woke fork, and then lots of people, I don't know, died or something. It was I basically committed genocide by calling it a woke
Well,
fork.
you got to tell me. So, where were you 10 years ago, and what was happening, and what radicalized you?
Okay, so I mean, my path is kind of similar to yours, just in the like not game side. So I was doing the running engineering teams thing, and for a lot of years, and moved over to tech journalism, and after I did that for a couple of years, I started covering whatever stories I found interesting, and occasionally those stories would uh, would challenge the status quo in some certain way. And I would go to these tech conferences, and I'd sit in the press rooms with all the other tech journalists, and none of them would cover those stories. To give you an example, I was at OzCon one year, the open source conference put on by O'Reilly. Big event, huge thing. Just tons of money goes into these events. I was sitting there at a keynote, sitting in the audience. I wasn't even sure I was going to cover what the keynote was. I don't remember what the topic was supposed to be. It was dreadfully boring. But then the keynote guy gets up there, and it's this vice president from Microsoft. And he puts a slide up on the screen that tells people, and then he goes on a rant about how the inclusivity and diversity was so important that we didn't need allies anymore. What we needed were accomplices. And he began to encourage people to commit crimes against white men because that would help to promote diversity and inclusion. And he said that outright. He even had it on slides. And I took a few pictures of it, and I'm like, well, this is nuts. This is crazy. Like, why would a vice president get up and say these things? He's not going to have his job tomorrow. He just encouraged people to commit crimes based on gender and skin color. Oh, my Lord. And so then after the keynote, I'm laughing to myself. I go into the press room with, there was like 2 or 3 other journalists in there. And I'm like, can you believe that? And they looked at me like I was a Hitler in a Klan robe. And they're like, what do you mean? I did not find that offensive. And I'm like, he called for people to commit crimes, dudes. Like, that's news. Like, you have to report on this. And they're like, no, you don't. And so I started covering it. At the conference, people started going around, executives, conference organizers, showing people my picture and telling people at various companies, if you see this man, he's dangerous. Don't talk to him. To try and get people to stop doing interviews with me, because I was going to cover what this crazy VP said, where he was like, let's commit crimes and be accomplices in crimes against white men. And I'm like, this is nuts. And things kept happening like that were so stupidly off the charts that, 20 years earlier, if you would have said this is going to happen, it's not even in the realm of idiocracy. Like, it's not even in the realm of this would make a good, funny parody, because it's just too stupid. That would never happen. And now it was. And just bit by bit, I got radicalized, I guess. And so now here I am. And
so they called you dangerous.
They called me dangerous. Yeah,
they love to do that.
I was scary.
they resort to hyperbole almost instantly.
Yeah.
If you sharing the truth, this is an actual picture from an actual presentation, and there's not even your commentary on it.
No.
They're distributing it,
It's
and
too
they're
juicy to
saying
include commentary.
when people call the truth dangerous, there's a problem. And this is
Yes.
how they wedged it in. It's like they would say, I feel threatened. I feel like this is endangering my life. What, this PowerPoint presentation? Were they encourage you? And what law were they encouraging? Encouraging people to break? Was it a hiring law, or what
I
was it?
no, they said it was that people should commit crimes against white people, nebulous crimes, but whatever it was, they should be willing to
Wow.
go to jail. And that they said they had this big slide like we don't something like we don't need allies, we need accomplices or something like that. And it was just the most bizarre thing. Like, why encourage someone to commit nebulous vague crimes? Like why would you even do that?
So you're not even
Baffling.
saying like what we're seeing now in Microsoft with Obsidian, and there's a game coming out called Avowed that
Jeez.
launches on Thursday, and the art director of Avowed is literally on record on social media committing a crime, saying that we will not hire white people, we're going to replace them.
Yeah.
We're going to replace the white people in our studio as our hiring practice. And Elon Musk called it out, and I called it out, and nothing's been done to this person, by the way,
Nothing ever
except
is.
that they said shut up. So he hasn't posted on social media since that call out, and back in, what was it, November, December,
Yeah, a few months back.
and he's gone radio silent. And they're launching in 3 months, and they're just trying to make it disappear. But this is still happening at Microsoft. So
Oh
from the
yeah.
time you saw those slides till today, apparently there is a crime happening right now in Microsoft Game Studios.
What's crazy is, so in the time, so about 2 years after this happened, that guy that got up and said, let's commit crimes against white guys, got promoted. he got
Of
got up to
course.
a senior VP role. And it's I mean, these sorts of things keep happening. I remember, so last year, or a little over a year ago, I was reporting on the IBM and Red Hat stuff, where IBM and Red Hat were on record as saying, let's discriminate against white guys and Asian guys. White guys and Asian guys. We got to discriminate against those guys because can't have those guys, right? And I kept publishing all this leaked material from inside about how there was bonus packages for executives who would hire less white and Asian guys. And I'm like, this is illegal. It resulted in a ton of lawsuits, but the company hasn't changed. Like, they're still pushing it just as hard. It's like what Microsoft is doing. They're still pushing the craziness just as hard, even though everything's being pointed out and the lawsuits are ramping up. It boggles my mind from the point of view of like a shareholder or a board member, how they let that continue.
And
It's
none of it is
insane.
being prosecuted. I mean, look at Google, and what was his name?
Judge James Damore with
James Damore,
yeah.
where he just pointed out, said, "Hey, these things don't make sense. They don't make logical consistency. I have some concerns." Right, that's all
That's
he
all he
said,
said.
and they fired him for it.
Yeah.
And then so he tried to prosecute that through California, and of course, California said, "Oh, no, there's nothing wrong here." But what's changed now is we have a DOJ that is going to prosecute this stuff, and it
Seems
is
like it.
and they have announced that they're going to be looking at things like discriminatory hiring, and so which is unlawful. And so
Just a
this is
little.
something
Yeah.
that encourages me. But you're right, I still see to this day, even within Activision Blizzard, I posted the CEO doubling down in public Slack to the all company message about their
Saw
DEI
that.
and hiring policies. And I said, this is really bad. I think that studio, Microsoft Games in particular, I think is too far gone. Ubisoft, I
They're
also
gone.
think is too far gone. But I had another question. Are you
Nuts.
able to pull up links? And how technical is your audience?
My audience is crazy technical.
All right.
We're
So
hard nerds, man. Hard nerds.
So, I mean, I just wanted to show the height of ridiculousness here back in the day. Is there a way I can open up chat here?
Well, here, you know what? Even if you're just on like a direct message to me over on X or something, you can
Here,
send
I
me a
see
link there.
chat with everyone.
Do it.
I'll do it there. So if you just open it up and scroll down to like Essential Owl's summary of this is about that programming language, the C plus equal.
Right.
And I don't know if you want to talk about this, but I just think
A
it's
feminist programming language called C plus equality. Some changes include renaming of class to social construct, the prohibition of Y variables. That's pretty good.
yes.
And bugs are called snowflakes. Beautiful.
The language is to be strictly interpreted using feminist theory. Under no circumstances should the language be compiled, as compilation and the use of a compiler imposes an oppressive and toxic relationship between the high level descriptive language and the low level machine code. Instead, C plus equal is interpreted, which fosters communication and itself a strong female trait.
Oh my word. I the thing that I like about that is how it seems entirely plausible. Like
And there's no
that's not that
classes
far
because
off.
those are social constructs.
Oh yeah, you got
They're
it. Yeah.
renamed. They're renamed to social constructs.
So,
See,
so
it's just hilarious to me. That was my background. I grew up on 8-bit computers, learning 6502 assembly, basic, making my first games that way, and eventually I bluffed my way into my university eye tracking program. We were programming these very expensive eye tracking machines. They used to
nice.
be $250,000 at the time, using lasers, things you'd never stick in your eye today. And they said, "Do you know C?" And I said, "Yes." And I had no idea about C whatsoever.
That's how
And
you
I
do it, man.
and I grabbed the book and I crammed it in a week, and I showed up for work and started coding in C.
This is you know what? Exactly. You're speaking honestly to the audience that their stories are almost identical to yours in that way. We all grew up on 8-bit machines doing weird stuff like that. But I never understood. I never understood when people come out and start talking about things like imposter syndrome, because they start talking about imposter syndrome like it's this horrible thing. And I'm thinking back over my career and I'm like, how many times did someone come to me and be like, do you know how to do this in Perl? Yeah. No, of course I don't know. Was I going to figure it out over the weekend? Yeah. I didn't have imposter syndrome. I never knew what I was doing. I just figured it out. Like that's
Well,
part
yeah,
of
you
being an
fake it till you
engineer.
make it. But
Yeah,
I think what I
exactly.
had was confidence in my ability to learn, because I'd already been self-teaching myself.
Yes.
I was exploring languages like Forth and Lisp and everything else. I said, "See, that should be fine."
It's fine.
And my background in assembly language really helped out, because the normal stuff that trips people up, the low level stuff in C,
Yes.
pointers, addresses, was not a problem for me.
So
So
you were
that
good to
it
go.
didn't have that issue. So I felt pretty confident.
So
And
you didn't suffer from the imposter syndrome too much.
oh, I sweated though. I was like, I got to show up
Well,
for
you're
work and I got to
supposed to
start coding.
sweat. You're supposed to sweat, right? You're
and
supposed to be
I
nervous. That's fine.
and I had no idea about Unix systems at the time, and I actually, this was not even Unix. We were on a PDP at the time.
Ooh.
Yeah, but it was all strange command line stuff to me, and then eventually I got into I learned enough Unix to be dangerous. We had a graphics lab with Sun Microsystems, Sun workstations, and
Nice.
I caused so much trouble in college in programming and not knowing what I was doing. A couple things happened. I think that one time we had a phone system, right? So back then, phone freaking and all that stuff
Yeah.
was a big thing. I wasn't trying to do that. I was president of the anime club, and I was trying to mass deliver an announcement that we were showing Akira at the school theater, and we wanted everybody to come. And this list was originally supposed to go to a limited set of members, and these were IBM or ROM phones, I think they were called. I forget what it was, but it's some university system that had a master
That's a
distribution
thing.
system.
Yeah.
So I was poking around trying to find commands to do this, and I inadvertently caused a loop, and the message replicated to everybody in the university, inviting them to this, not just once, but over and over
Well,
again,
did a lot of people
filling up
show
their
up?
voicemail. Oh yeah, everyone showed up, but I got death threats. I mean, people were so mad they would call back the number saying, "This is the 10th message you've left to see your stupid anime. I'm gonna track you down and I'm gonna find you."
It's fantastic.
So I got in trouble. I got in trouble with the university then. And then the second time, that was pretty bad. But the second time was worse. Do you remember? Okay, so I was new to Sun Microsystems and Unix, and I was trying to
Yeah.
do I think I was trying to do a dot forward or something like that, right, for email. And I inadvertently created a recursive condition. And so what had happened was someone had sent me an email and it forwarded it and it started to replicate throughout the system exponentially. And never forget, I was sitting in the very expensive graphics lab. We had an AT&T Pixel machine, we had Sun Microstations, and all the terminals are on. It's like 3 a.m. I'm the only person there, right? And suddenly I'm on my terminal on my system, and I get, the Sun systems had a little CPU monitor, right?
Yeah.
And the little line, and I used to keep that up. Suddenly it hit double tombstones, and I'd never seen that before. Little graphical tombstones, right? And I was like, what is this? And then the one next to me crashed out and displayed tombstones, and all around me it's like a movie where all the computers go down. It's like, because I think it was running on their screensavers or something, and they all started to flake out. And I called up the computer interest floor. I was friends with them, and I said, hey, I don't know Unix, but what's happening here? What does this mean? And it's like, double tombstone. I'm like, yeah. It's like your CPU is maxed out. I'm like, oh, okay, well, it's happening on all the graphics workstations here. And then they said, it's happening to us too. So what was happening
Oh
was,
dear.
this thing has replicated through, and then suddenly the university IT security team exploded into action, because I guess there was a big internet worm that had just hit a month prior. I forget what it was, but it, like, took down vast swaths of the internet, and they thought that it was back, but it was me. And so I had brought down the entire university computing system by not knowing what I was doing.
You built a
Just to
good
experiment.
reputation for yourself at your college, man.
Yeah. Well, luckily, they knew me.
Grummz.
They kind of knew me, and and we all had a good laugh about it. But yeah, they called up the dean. They thought it was an attack.
At
And
a certain point, I think we just revoke your rights to have anything electronic. You know what I mean? If I'm the dean of the college, I put you on timeout, man. You go back to paper and pencils, and that's it.
I don't know how I keep getting away with it.
Okay, all right. Let's
Sorry, that was a wild tangent.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful, man. It's beautiful. Let's bring it in here for a second, because there's like a million things I want to talk to you about, but I wanted to come in from this, and this is something I've been seeing a lot lately on the open source side, and I know you see it all over the place on gaming, is the crazy censorship that's happening right now. And it's been happening for a while. This week, there were stories about weird censorship happening on Reddit, which is not anything, I guess, all that surprising. There's always weird censorship stories on Reddit. But, we're constantly seeing these groups of people, whether they're on Reddit or Blue Sky or the old Twitter before it became X or wherever, and they don't like what other people are saying, so they clamp down and just mass censor. And what I'm noticing, it's I guess it's the kind of the Barbara Streisand effect, where you try and tell people not to talk about it and it just makes them talk about it more, right? And I'm seeing that happen constantly, and what's confusing me is how nobody and it's all on, the woke DEI side of things, how nobody seems to learn the lesson that if you clamp down really hard, ban everyone who says something you don't like, and censor things like crazy, that just makes the story bigger. Like how have they not learned that lesson after so many
They
years? Like after what they did with all the Gamergate folks and with you and with so many other people, it's the same thing. It
because it
just made you
worked.
bigger.
No, no, it worked for a while because you
Well,
had complete collusion between all the social media and tech sites. Everything from Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, it was all locked
so
down.
is it that it worked for a while and so they want it to keep
Yes.
working?
Yeah, it worked after Gamergate and after they were able to squash Gamergate and completely slander it. They took over Wikipedia's entry too. If you read Wikipedia's English entry, it's the lie. If you switch to Japanese or Chinese, you get the truth, right? You run it through that translator. Those
Oh,
editors are
Wikipedia.
truthful, but the ones in the West completely have completely distorted it, and you just have to switch languages to see the stark difference, which is amazing. But no, they had total control. This was we learned later on that one reason they had total control is because the censorship became absolute once the US government got involved. Once the US
Yeah.
government got involved and started pressuring these companies, started pressuring Zuckerberg and everybody else, they had to fall in line. And you couldn't even discuss the orders you were getting from the government, right? But we now know this is true because the Twitter files have come out and Zuckerberg has spoken openly about this now.
About the
And
Facebook web portal that allowed the
oh
Biden
yeah,
White
and
House staffers to directly censor people.
yeah, and Mark Andreessen is being very frank about this too. So we all know this is true. So you had, and I even felt like Jack Dorsey of Twitter was kind of a CEO held captive both at the. I believe that he has more free speech instincts than most people give him credit for, but he was captive by his executive team, by his investors, and by the government, and by his activist employees. And there's only so much a CEO can do under those conditions. Now,
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't say he's come around completely because Blue Sky is
Well,
still, you know.
well, he's out of Blue Sky now, isn't he?
Oh, is he out of Blue
Yeah, I
Sky?
think I think he
Okay.
got ousted. So he created Blue Sky, and I don't think he has any involvement with it anymore.
But the atmosphere in Silicon Valley was also very different. So if you, I mean, so I've done like the Sandhill Crawl, raised a bunch of VC money, all that good
Yeah.
stuff before. It's definitely a club, right? And when the club is virtue signaling and very anti-Trump at the time and very uh pro wokeness, you can't talk about this stuff. You can't get deals done if you go the other way. So all this stuff was kind of tolerated. Cancel culture was a very big thing. You could be canceled for anything. Remember Donglegate?
Yes. Yes. That's true. You're right. You're right. The more I'm thinking about it, you're absolutely right. I think there was a period of time where that extreme censorship, it worked so well, even though it's not working as well for them anymore. They want to keep going with it. Like it's still their old playbook. It's still the
It
same
was
strategy.
it was self-defeating because it was so absolute and had gotten to such ridiculous bounds that prima facie on its face it was a ridiculous lie that everyone could suddenly see.
Yeah.
The emperor had no clothes. The censorship was unsustainable because it had gotten to such ridiculous levels, especially during COVID and post COVID. Uh, all the normies woke up, and then we knew it was true. And then the Twitter files comes out, and we can finally have a place to talk about it on X and yeah, it all the floodgates open. And of course, Trump did a tremendous job with the fake news stuff, pounding
Oh
on
man.
that over
Yeah.
and over again during his administration. That really started the cracks, and people started looking. And then the censorship clamped down even more, and they banned him from social media, which
That's
immediately
crazy. That was
50% of
crazy.
America goes, "What's going on here? This is a sitting president." And then you have it come out later on, and it just became so obvious. So the censorship was so effective and that they were encouraged to do more and more ridiculous things to a point where it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. It destroyed itself basically. It was no longer sustainable. But yeah, they got away with it for a long time.
They sure
These
did.
people were promoted, they fell upwards. You talked about the VP being promoted at Microsoft. That's happening today with Dragon Age Veilguard's game director,
That's
Corinne
crazy.
Corinne Bush,
Yeah.
I think, right? And this dude gets promoted, and is now going to be running what is rumored to be the new Baldur's Gate 4, right?
That
Is
infuriates me to
Yeah.
8 different levels. The first two Baldur's Gate are like some of my favorite games. Like they're the most amazing things, and I can't handle it. It makes my
and I
brain melt
and I
down.
really enjoyed Baldur's Gate 3. And to me, that's an example of, if you want to do diversity as a creator and you want to do it the right way, that's a good way to do it. You don't sacrifice the game quality, you don't sacrifice the story for it.
Right,
Everything's completely
right.
optional. It doesn't make the product worse. It doesn't make society worse. And it doesn't destroy things in the sake, and it doesn't pander and hit you with the message and try to tell you that you're evil. And unfortunately, Hasbro has taken the rights back, and Larian doesn't want to do a sequel anyway. So they claim. I believe Hasbro just said, "There's a lot of money. We're going to take it for ourselves." I bet you that's what happened, actually. And Larian,
Anything that Wizards of the Coast gets near nowadays just makes me sad.
yeah.
My
And so,
oldest kid is super into D&D. A total tangent. Super into D&D now, right? She's 14, mega into D&D. Couldn't be prouder, right? But she was down at the store checking out. We were looking on the tablet, looking online at some of the new Dungeon Master guides coming out, and we're like, oh man, we gotta rush to get stuff older quickly before we just can't find it anymore, because the new stuff is just so utterly ridiculous. Like they replaced like fearsome looking, like intense monsters with like little furry pink and purple kittens, and it's just she just is like furious about it, and which makes
and
me
they
feel like I'm
removed
doing something wrong.
gender from the monster manual. Incubus and succubus are no longer male and female.
Yes.
They
What
removed
the heck?
gender from the sphinxes. They have safety cards in the DM's guide. So you can sit there and cross your arms when you're uncomfortable from
Yes.
anything.
Yes.
It's absolutely ridiculous the way it's gone. And now they've taken over, and they're going to do
Oh,
Baldur's Gate 4. And who did they hire? The rumor is that the game director that ruined the Dragon Age series was their
that's
number one
insane.
choice.
That's
After
insane.
it was public that the game was lousy with story and she did a horrible job,
And
they
Baldur's Gate, the whole thing
still
is story.
hired him.
I can't handle it. I can't
They
handle it.
still hired him. Him, her. I can never
Her.
whatever it's going to be at the
What
time. This is a superposition of states.
It's Zerzem, whatever. I don't know, but
Yep.
it's infuriating, whatever the heck it is, and I just, oh my gosh, I can't even.
It should be on merit, and
Yes,
it
yes,
should be on merit, and there
yes. It should, but it's not. I mean, it's like that throughout games, throughout all of big tech and open source. I mean, there's even in the open source world, there's this crusade against meritocracy that's been going on for some years now. The guy that created the code of conduct. Speaking of the weaponized code of conduct stuff, the guy that created that, his name was Corey MK, and he decided that he was a lady named Coraline, and he was going to create a code of conduct specifically to be a weapon to be used against anyone that he felt was a transphobe. So he created this something called the Creator Covenant Code of Conduct, right? And he started pushing it in every project he could, and every project that adopted it, he would then go into, search through every contributor, find every example he could possibly find of misgendering or using the wrong terminology or pronouns or something, and he would begin to demand, in the name of the code of conduct that they just adopted, that this project ban that evildoer, right? And the whole point of it was this weapon. And that dude, Corey MK, created this movement called the post-meritocracy movement, and created the post-meritocracy manifesto that everything within open source was, the basic idea was, should not be based on merit and personal accomplishments, but be based on things like your self-declared gender, what groups you're associated with, and the like. And it's amazing how many groups said, yeah, that's a good idea.
Well, I mean, they
Oh, that
created
sounds
this
pretty
huge,
smart. Let's do that.
yeah, they created a huge false narrative that the is that that there was some kind of uninclusiveness, that we were actually excluding people and from D&D, from games and everything else, when that wasn't true. My table was super diverse. We had people from all over the world. We had women at our table. We wanted everybody, because we were geeks. D&D was not popular at the time. We needed everybody we could
You
get,
need
and
everyone.
we were all kind of marginalized, to use that word. We were all kind of pushed out from mainstream high school and middle school. And
Yes.
so we hung out together, and everyone was welcome. And I don't
Yes.
know why they're so afraid of merit, because you can be trans and you can be merit and you can do so much. Like, and we didn't exclude. Look at Daniel Buttonberry, right? Daniel Buttonberry was a game developer, trans game developer, developed Mule, the classic game Mule,
Mule's
Seven Cities
awesome.
of Gold,
Oh my gosh.
amazing programmer, developed incredible techniques on
Legend.
8-bit hardware at the time. Why are they so afraid of merit? Merit doesn't exclude anyone, and we were having great success with trans developers back in the day who were awesome game designers and coders. They exist. It's like, I'll tell you what, this is a cover for mediocrity. This is a cover for people, and especially in open source. What I saw 10 years ago is that these people had no technical skills, but they
Yeah.
wanted power. Okay. And so what they did is they used, they used or made up, their own gender identity or whatever, in order to portray themselves as the victim, to classify themselves as marginalized, and to use that as a crutch to insert themselves into the power structure when they did not have the technical expertise to do so.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I'm trying. The name is falling out of my brain right now. But do you remember there was back in like the 1950s and 60s? There was a guy that decided he was a lady that worked at IBM, and he worked on a bunch of microprocessor design. He was one of the guys that came up with kind of like predictive compilation instructions and things like that in some of the early CPUs. And brilliant dude, right? He decided he was a lady. Ended up being one of the earlier, let's get surgery and pretend I'm a lady now, right? Great. Well, he took a bunch of time off to do that and lost his job. But he came back as a lady. Now, everyone knew he was a dude, but, he grew his hair out and he wore dresses and everything now. And he went back to IBM as a lady. And everyone at IBM had worked with him as a dude, just, a year prior. And they're like, okay, I can't remember what his name was, but now it was like, okay, Sarah, wink, wink, come on in. Everyone's like, this dude is brilliant. Of course we want to work with him. We don't really care if he thinks he's a dude, thinks he's a lady, thinks he's a hobgoblin. We don't care. Just come on in and work on the stuff because your patents are already righteously awesome. Come and make some more. That guy went on to work at Xerox, Alto's Research Center, and everywhere else, did some amazing work and pioneering work in computer processor design. Nobody ever actually cared that he was a dude that identified as a trans woman or whatever. As long as he wasn't like trying to force it on anyone else, everyone was like, fine,
Exactly.
build the computers and let's be awesome and nerd out about this awesome stuff we're building.
That's the other thing, is that
Even back then,
the,
it was like that in the nerd culture.
they didn't try to cancel everybody.
Yeah.
They didn't. They just wanted to be who they felt comfortable being and do a great job.
Yeah.
And they didn't try to sit there and become a problem for HR and try to fire everybody else in the studio. That is, that's the way it should be. It's like, I don't really care, as long as you do good work and we're all making awesome products together. It's like, let's go do that.
Yes. That's, what you were saying about like being in middle school. I mean, come on. Most of us were bullied like heck in elementary and middle school because we were nerds.
Oh, but nobody remembers that.
But we all got together. You're right. And we all got together in the library in front of the Apple IIs or wherever our meeting place was. And we got to be nerdy together. Boy or girl, any ethnicity, race, whatever. Didn't matter. We were just nerdy. I don't understand why we can't just hang out and be nerds anymore. Like it's ridiculous to me. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and this lie is very pernicious in Dungeons and Dragons. You know, they like to say that, and they came out in the latest 50th anniversary book and absolutely slandered the original creators,
Oh my
calling them
gosh.
sexist, misogynists, racist, all these sort of
They
things.
were
And it
mean to
was
Gary, man.
it wa- and
They did Gary wrong.
they really did. And Rob Kuntz came out, the
Yeah.
last surviving member of the OG founding team,
Yeah.
and said, "This is all a lie." And I did an interview with him and I talked to him for a long time. Really great guy. And he was telling me about all the women that worked at TSR, and the one woman who helped popularize D&D at the time, who wrote for a wargaming magazine and eventually created her own dedicated D&D newsletter. And they give her a ton of credit for making D&D more popular on college
Awesome.
campuses. And none of this stuff that these D&D historians claim to have been the pervasive attitude of the time are true. This is historic revisionism in order to prop up an agenda based on lies, based on stuff that didn't actually happen. And you see this time and again. And what's even more egregious is when they revise history, the official quote unquote history, in order to support the narrative. And the most recent case of that is in Assassin's Creed Shadows, where they wanted to say Yasuke was a samurai, a black samurai in feudal Japan. And there was literally no information on that. And they changed Wikipedia and they changed Encyclopedia Britannica literally days after we mentioned it in order to support this narrative. And I've
Yes.
seen it
It's
happen
ridiculous.
with dictionary.com too and Webster. They changed definitions of words during the Trump administration whenever there was a quibble about, well, does this word really mean this? I forget what it was, but I would see it in real time. And it's especially dangerous in the information age when we have no physical copies
Yes.
and stuff can be edited out from under us. Movies, TV shows, everything can be retconned.
We don't have any
And
bookshelves filled with dictionaries, encyclopedias anymore to say
yeah,
this is snapshot in time 2 years ago. This is truth. We don't have that anymore.
yeah, I think that is extremely dangerous. And if you know, and it can be, and it has been horribly abused, as we've seen, to completely retcon history, both in real life as well as you were talking real life history with Assassin's Creed, all the way to 40K lore. I played, you know, Warhammer 40K, and when the Femstodes issues
Of
came
course you
out,
do.
they
Of
said
course you
there
do.
were
A good
Games Workshop
nerdy but
said,
expensive hobby.
yeah,
You can't go wrong.
well, I have 3D printers now, thanks to
You're
Creality,
a
and
cheater. You're a
so
cheater. You're 3D printing your own
oh,
40K.
I will still buy 40K minis, but here's what I tell people: it's like, if you want to hit for GW, but you can't give up the crack, because I totally understand you.
Yeah.
You just have to get them to underperform. They have to come out with new miniatures, new supplements every quarter in order to have number go up,
Yeah.
right? Because they're a public company. It's like, just underperform 20% instead of buying your entire, you know, allocation of new minis at the time. Proxy 20% of them. Yeah, give them some money, buy that, but you just have to get them to underperform,
Send
and
him a
then
message. Send him a
get
message.
get your scanners out and scan those, and then make the rest of your army with them.
All right. That actually sounds like a great way to go.
Yeah, you don't have to give it up 100% in order to really get them to start listening to you. And we did this, you know, all last year. I would say we just have to get Ubisoft to underperform. We can't tank Star Wars Outlaws, but we can get it to underperform. We can't tank Veilguard, but we can get it to underperform. Underperforming for a public company is just as bad as absolute failure.
Oh, yeah.
And it's because of the way that it drives investment in stock prices. And the executives notice because it hits their stock compensation. So
They like
this is the
money.
way you do it.
Yeah.
You don't have, and I would say anybody trying to apply pressure to these organizations, what I've learned is the only thing that works is money. And you don't have to do a total boycott. You just, as in the case of a public company, you just have to get it to underperform whatever their stated targets are.
It just has to hurt enough that they take notice and don't
And
want it to hurt anymore.
And it makes a massive difference.
Huge.
It makes a massive difference. So
Huge.
yeah, I know there's a lot of black pilled people out there saying nothing we do matters and everything. No. We've proved the whole last year, you know, of course you can't get everybody to boycott, but you can trim back your miniature collection just a little bit, delay your purchases so they're not in the quarter that they're expecting the sales to hit, but maybe you buy them 3 months later, right? And that's all you have to do, and you can wage a very effective campaign and start having leverage. I can tell you from discussions with internal teams that I've had in the industry that what we did last year as gamers to push back on the wokeness stuff has them terrified inside of studios now. I
Yes.
mean, has them absolutely terrified, and CEOs are freaking out right now. And so this is very effective. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to hide it now. They're trying to play the delay game, but I think we're onto them and we know what's happening. And we want to see real change, and we're rewarding the companies that do change. Unfortunately, I'd like to see it come from the West, but it's coming from China and it's coming from,
On the gaming side, it really is.
and Korea right now. But we're getting games that we like and that we want to play from outside of the U.S., from outside of Europe, and executives can look at the performance of those
They can
games
still
compared
see
to
that.
what they're
Yeah.
pushing, and they know what's happening at the top.
Hey,
So there's
the
this.
South Koreans made more money than we did. What
Oh,
did they do different?
and they're doing it for $40 million instead of 400. It's
I mean, that hits him in the pocketbook pretty hard. I mean,
Very hard.
that makes a difference. So just to bring all this together as we come to the end of an hour or so, where are we right now? So I mean, it's been a long journey from Gamergate through multiple administrations now and all sorts of craziness that's happening. From the games perspective, from the game industry, where are we right now?
I'll have to tell you that we're in a tremendous situation where we just give a little push and it all falls together, and we have to give that push, and we got to lock it in. We were tremendously successful last year. I started the 2-year non-binary game program where we're not going to buy AAA games that are woke or that abuse the consumers.
Just to make sure everyone understands this, non-binary
Yes,
B-U-Y. Yeah, it's just it's
B-U-Y.
nice little play, nice little entendre there. Okay, continue.
I can't take credit for the name. I started off as a joke. I said it's 2 years to stop the spread, and someone else came up with non-binary, and so we combined it, and so it's the 2-year non-binary program. And this is just we're
Beautiful.
coming up on the first year in March, and it's worked beautifully. We have really. I said I don't know if we can do it, but we should probably try to take down Ubisoft. I said Ubisoft's a target because they only have these 3 games and they got nothing else. It's time to hit them. And they are one of the most woke and DEI infested studios
woke.
around.
Oh heavens.
And nobody thought it was possible. And look where we are today, where they are contemplating a sale, they're contemplating restructure. Things are they're reeling financially, and it's all their own fault. It's all their own fault for pushing very obvious DEI propaganda that gamers didn't want, while sacrificing the quality of the game in order to do so.
Yeah.
And the inherent processes within the studio. So that's going very well. But then, it was 50-50, or maybe it wasn't even 50-50. We thought it was a slim chance. Trump wins. Okay. Trump wins. Elon gets into gaming hardcore and starts talking about this stuff. And what just happened is they just cut funding for all of this DEI and ESG stuff, which was
Beautiful.
which was why executives were so keen to do
Beautiful.
it in the first place. Because in 2019, 2020, 2021, that was the cheap money for funding games. And a lot of people think that the big EAs of the world and Ubisofts, that they just use their cash reserves to fund these games. That's not true at all. I know the CTOs of these companies from back in the Blizzard days. They will use the cheapest money on the market that's not theirs in order to fund the game. All right. Yeah. And so the cheapest money back then was an ESG DEI, and that was driven both from a top-down perspective. We know that government programs were encouraging this, private investor groups were encouraging this, but also anything green and sustainable on the ESG front was selling very well for funds. And so fund managers were pushing this as well. And so that's where, if you wanted to shave 1% or 2% off the interest for funding your game, that's where you went to do it. And that was significant money when you're talking about these huge, huge budgets. And they didn't want to take on all the cash risks themselves, right? So that is evaporated. All the government stuff is evaporated. It's going to have massive trickle down effects into studios. And these executives, they're going to be cutting jobs and they're going to be cutting the activists first. I know that for a fact, that the ones who are salvageable, they're already looking at the downsizing as an opportunity to trim the activism. The other thing is DEI out. They just announced, I think, that the Department of Education is cutting all their DEI stuff.
Saw that.
So the
Saw that.
indoctrination program that created these activists,
Oh,
especially
thank
from art
heavens.
schools and gaming, that's all going to go away. And so the next generation of game artists that come along, they're going to be much more thinking for themselves than being programmed into this DEI ESG stuff to begin with.
I mean, everything you're saying fills my soul with joyful hope. I, I hope. I go back and forth. Some days I look at gaming and big tech and open source and everything, and I see all this great movement, all the things that you just laid out. And then the next day I'll see, everything that's happening at Microsoft, and they're doubling down, and they own so many great properties with Blizzard and Activision and everything else. And then I see what's happening at big open source foundations where they're doubling down on it some more. And I go back and forth. It almost feels like we have almost like a split going on, where some companies, foundations, and organizations are like, oh, the money train's drying up, and if I keep pushing the DEI stuff, we're out of business in February. All right, no more DEI, and they're waking up and going great. But then we have the other half who are just like, okay, you thought we were going DEI before, we're doubling down, son. And I don't know what that ends up looking like if you flash forward a year.
I think that you can just look at the financials and know that it's a disastrous long-term strategy for your company. That
You'd
the short term,
think. You'd think.
it's proven now, and especially in games, you can just look at the market outcome of woke versus non-woke games and see a magnitude of order difference in terms of the ratio of profit to expense in creating those games. It's massive. You can't ignore it. Investors aren't going to ignore it either. Look at what's happening with, is it Mozilla Foundation? You have the Mozilla Foundation now that Google is no longer boosting them. And I mean, the nonprofit part of that is falling apart. I think that this has to be a house of cards that is in the middle of falling. And someone asked me the other day, it's like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm at a company and they just doubled down on DEI. The CEO came out with a smile on her face, said, "We don't care what the current administration says. We are proud of our programs and we will redouble our efforts. Resist, resist, resist." If you are at a company where the COO is giving a speech like that, or if you are at Activision Blizzard where you see the CEO send out an email like that doubling down on DEI, leave. That is the sign to leave. That company is not going to be strong financially.
No,
There
wait.
will be layoffs.
Wait, Mark, Grummz, before you leave, don't, there's this two-step process here. First, screenshot everything and send them to Grummz and Lunduke, and we will get them out there for you. Then leave. I just want to make it clear. This is a two-step process, and if we jump past step one, we don't get the great screenshots, and we need those screenshots.
I
People
have a
need to
new
see.
hobby. I have a new hobby. You know how some people collect stamps or coins? I like to collect. I think there's going to be a huge, really hilarious period of history. I love to collect HR training seminar slides and presentations and pamphlets.
Oh my heavens. I love it. When I get like I'll get like some internal company like, here's a here's a PDF version of a slide deck that we just got as a presentation internally. I love it. I see that and I get excited. It's ridiculous. My wife makes fun of me for it because it's stuff that when I was working at these companies would have just made my eyes bleed and I instantly fall into a coma. But now that I'm out of it and covering this stuff, oh, I can't get enough of it. People, send me thousands of slides with speaker notes and all of the crazy HR stuff. Oh, it's like crack. I love it.
I'm going to print them all out, and I'm going to put them in binders on my shelf, and no one's going to believe us. If all goes well, in 10 years, no one's going to believe us that this stuff was actually company-wide distributed. That's my dream.
When all this is done, let's get together compare notes and pull together every slide deck from every crazy HR big tech company, and let's make a coffee table book so
Oh,
people
that'd
can
be
just
awesome.
flip through it in high glossy paper. Oh man, between the two of us,
Oh my
we've got
gosh.
hundreds of pages at this point, so why
Coffee
not?
table book.
Let's
Oh my
do it.
gosh.
All right.
Precious moments of inclusion.
uh, Grummz, what do you want people to know? Where should people go to check out your stuff?
Just follow me at Grummz on X. That's where I engage with what I call PvP. With although
Of
it's
course.
lessened since people have left in protest to Blue Sky, but that's where I talk about it. And I've moved from talking about games. I'm blending it more with what's happening with DEI at the cultural and political level too,
Yeah.
because there's so much movement there. And people used to say, "Oh, Grums, what are you doing? You're just arguing about pixels on a screen." And I was like, no, no, no. This is different. This is my area. This is where I choose to fight the battle against woke and DEI. But it's important because it's culture, and
Yes.
that feeds into politics. And you have to push back here in culture as strongly as you push back in politics. And so that's
Yes.
why I talk about it in games. But that doesn't mean that that's all I care about. I'm actually caring about society and civilization as a whole and the craziness that we've been going through for the past 10 years. And it has to stop. It has to
Yes.
stop because it's killing products, it's killing companies, it's killing our society. And finally, we have a foot in the door and we need to lock it in. So it's now more important than ever to push. And we have so much more support now than we ever did. So please help me, join the fight. Follow me at Grums,
At Grummz.
and remember, 3D printers are your friend, and all you need is to proxy 20% of your army. That's
If
my
you're gonna
parting message.
if you're gonna cause the game workshop folks to reconsider, um, I know we gotta go, but the you're just arguing about pixels on a screen thing. I hear that every friggin' day. Like I'll point out, why do we have a trans flag on this thing for this open source project? And I'll be like, what's going on with that? And people are like, oh, it's just a couple pixels, Lunduke. I'm like, dude, that's all I've ever done is argue about pixels. This has literally been my hobby and my job since I was like 7, is looking at pixels on a screen and having feelings about them. Like,
And it's disingenuous because that they know the power of it. That's why they pushed for it. That's
right.
that's why they knew that it would transform everything if they could get their message, and virtue signaling everywhere. And they wanted the pixels on the screen. They wanted the trans colors on the screen. They wanted,
If it's just pixels on the
the
screen,
pride
then take
flags.
those pixels out.
Yeah, if
If
it's
you
just
don't care about it, just take them out.
completely disingenuous argument.
Right? I'm sorry. The pixels on a screen thing, like telling a computer nerd to stop arguing about pixels on a screen is as like telling Hemingway to not worry so much about these letters. Why are you thinking about letters, Hemingway? Like, it's like, come on, this is what
All
we
right,
do.
I got another games dev story for you
Yep.
that's kind of nerdy.
Lay it on me.
So so I think we just went from, remember IBM PC had what it was, XGA graphics, which was like 16 colors or something like that. And
Yeah.
whatever it was. And we went to VGA graphics, which was
Like
200.
EGA 16 colors, and then there was
Yeah.
an XGA and then MC. Yeah. Okay.
And then we had 256 colors. Well, that was great. And we had just enabled VGA support in one of our games. And one of the programmers comes to my office very upset. Very upset. And I said, well, what's going on? He's like, I just worked so hard to get, VGA graphics support in here. And look at this. Look at this start screen. And he showed me this screen. It's like, Bill over here, the artist, only used 60 colors. We have 256 colors. We need to maximize it. He was very upset.
It's terribly upsetting. If you're not using at least 90% of the available color palette, why even have them?
It's got to look like crayon vomit. Otherwise, you're disrespecting the graphics programmers.
I feel like no matter what, we should all just be happy that it's not like the weird color palette of like the ZX Spectrum or like the browns of a Commodore 64 anymore. Anything other than that, we're fine.
On the Apple II, you had to like mix adjacent pixels in order to get colors. It was nuts.
It was awesome. As you by nuts, you mean awesome. All right, we gotta leave it there. Mark Grummz, Thank you, man. Finally, we got a chance to connect. It was truly, truly glorious. Keep doing what you're doing, my friend. The fight is important, and I appreciate your work. So
You
keep
too,
it up.
Brian. I really appreciate what you're doing in open source. It's been far too long there, and I feel like it's a little bit more of an uphill battle. Got a ways to go, but anything I can do,
Hey,
I
it's
will
job
do.
security. It's got that. Jeez. I tell
But
you what, though, in a heartbeat, as soon as it's not needed anymore, I'm going to be super psyched to go and talking about retro computing and like weird terminal applications again.
Yeah.
That is going to be a very happy day for me. But
Awesome.
yeah, we'll keep in touch, and everybody go follow Grummz on X. It's worth it. Even if you don't like the X thing, if you're like, oh, I don't like, so it's worth it. Follow me and Grummz and nobody else, and you'll still be happy. So just do that.
And spread the links outside of X. That's
Spread
important.
the links. And then with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the inner tubes, I do declare, end broadcast.